Today we have a very special guest. He is joining us from Hawaii. So he stayed up late just to talk to you guys, which I think is amazing. Danny, thank you so much. We're super grateful. And he is my personal friend. He's the founder and chief storyteller at Misthios Media. Danny, welcome to the show.
Hey, what's up, man? Thanks for having me on. Aloha, everybody. It's midnight here, so you're gonna have to excuse me if I'm seem a little exhausted, but I'm very excited and inspired to be here. So thank you for having me on, Hill.
Of course, my pleasure. And Danny, can you tell us? Oh, just one thing, guys. Since Danny is taking this effort for presenting and helping us, and in Hawaii it's kind of late. I think it would be awesome for us to turn on our video so that Danny feels that he's talking to like an audience, right? That would be extremely helpful. So,
Cool.
awesome, Seema, thank you so much. If you guys could turn on your videos, that would be amazing. Thank you guys. Thank you so much. You guys are the best. All right, Danny. So if you could tell us about yourself.
Yeah, sure. So I am Yonsei generation, fourth generation Japanese here in Hawaii. My mother's side immigrated out here in the late 1800s, early 1900s, and they've been out here ever since. My Japanese was really bad, so I'll be actually moving to Tokyo probably sometime early next year to study the language and expand my business. But I have a storytelling agency out here, which is a bit of an esoteric concept for some. So you can think of it like a creative agency, a turnkey creative agency, or full service boutique that does everything from media production to web to graphic design to marketing, everything. So, and we've got a really lovely team out here from all over the world, different walks of life. And we work with big brands to essentially tell stories to their customer demographics. So.
Perfect. And Danny, we were talking earlier, and you were talking about the concept of Japan being a brandless nation, which is the title of our show. What do you mean by brandless nation?
So I want to start off by saying that I think Japan is an amazing country and that they have so much to offer the world. So by no means am I saying there's anything wrong with Japan or the way that they market. What I will say is that the way Japanese market is completely different than the way that Western, brands market. And the main difference, I believe, is in the emotional relationships they form with their customer bases. In Japan's case, I feel that they don't particularly focus on building emotional relationships and are more focused on selling products and building value around their brand with features and technology and sales, things like that. And so what I mean by brandless nation is I feel that if you were to define a brand as a company that sells a product or service and forms emotional relationships with their customers, I don't feel Japan particularly meets that criteria. And therefore, I believe it's more of a brandless nation. And my observation is, or that theory is based off of the fact that I find that Japanese go gaga over Western European brands because it's something that they don't have in Japan. And it doesn't mean that there's anything wrong with the way the brands that are in Japan. It just means that there's something that Japan is doing and isn't doing, if that makes any sense, right? So I think we can make it better.
How can we make it better?
Well, the Japanese, they have this attachment to the Kaizen way, right? Of constant life of improvement, building upon things. And I think that's so amazing because they've taken some of the world's best inventions and made it like 1,000 times better. So I think from a sense of, if we were to approach it more from improving upon brands that Japan has, as opposed to coming in like most gaijin who think that they can just come to Japan and totally change the way that Japanese have been operating for thousands of years, it's not going to happen. So we would have to approach it more from a step-by-step building process, but and creating value for the Japanese around the data that correlates to emotions, emotional storytelling, emotional triggers, telling stories that mean something, that matter to their customer base. I think if we started doing that in Japan, Japan would, they're like one step away from a utopia.
So Danny, let me play devil's advocate real quick.
Sure.
So you say like, all right, guys, Japan is a brandless nation. And what if I say, all right, Danny, like I hear what you're saying. However, there's many famous companies in Japan, such as Sony, Panasonic, Rakuten, Mercari. Like, what about these brands?
So, well, let me ask you this. I'll answer your question with a question. Okay. When you think of Sony, what do you think of?
Sony, I think of the Walkman, the PlayStation technology.
Right. Okay. And when you think of Toyota, what do you think of?
Toyota, basically the Prius cars, Kaizen.
Right. And then what do you think of when you think of Apple?
Apple, damn. Inspiration, creativity, innovation, thinking outside the box, Steve Jobs.
Right. Okay. So, I'm not sure if you've noticed the difference there, but for Sony and Toyota, you focused on the products that they created. And with Apple, you focused on the way it made you feel, or the inspiration you drew from it, or the experiences that you've had using their products. That to me is the main differentiator here. It's Western brands have found a way, whether you want to call it subliminal hypnotizing, because I think it is a form of manipulation to some degree, but they've found a way to get you emotionally attached to their products and services. Japan, however, will literally throw features at you, or a sale, $19.99 in big red letters as you're passing by, or they'll scream it on the megaphone, or they'll hand you a flyer, and you'll see all these specs on the Sony camera, but very rarely do you see anything other than text. I would say that, and I could be totally messing this up, but 90% of the Japanese websites I've looked at are not very picture or video heavy. They're mostly text. And so they're trying to sell you on basically data points as opposed to experiences or emotional triggers.
Awesome. Danny, we have a really good question from William,
Sure.
One of our loyal members. William, go ahead, man.
Thanks.
Take it away, Will.
Hey, Danny. It's good to talk to you. So my question is, I was actually at like a community management event here in Japan, and we were talking about the difficulty in measuring like emotions, basically. You could sort of talk about things with regards to like the emotional tone scale. I think like 1,000 being like pure joy and bliss versus like 0 is like guilt and shame and stuff like that. From like a marketing perspective, I think the whole emotional manipulation thing kind of plays more. That's more when you start playing into like their fear. It's like, oh, if you don't have this, you're gonna be a loser amongst all your friends, and therefore you should get this, because if you have this, then you are cool or whatever, right? So can you say anything about that?
Yeah, a lot of companies will guilt trip you, or pull at your heartstrings, tug at them to make you feel more empathetic, I think, towards their cause, or sympathetic sometimes too. But I think the truly brilliant brands are the ones that find a way to tap into some sort of nostalgia or some sort of memory that you have, an experience that you have, by focusing on something that's rather universal. But I also think that they target specific archetypes, specific customer avatars, if you will, specific people, and they have those specific people in mind when they create these stories, because those are the people who buy their products, and they're not really focused on all the other, tertiary archetypes out there. But I think that if you take a brand like, I'm trying to think of like Amazon, for example. Amazon is a very large consumer brand, e-commerce. There's something on there for everybody. And so the brand archetype that Amazon represents is the average Joe, or the everyday guy or gal, right? And, that's can be very easy to market to in terms of storytelling. It can be very difficult, right? So how do you take a cookie cutter approach to something like that and tell a story that everybody's going to resonate with? So I don't know, as opposed to Nike, for example, who focuses on is the risk taker archetype, the adventurer. It's kind of a little edgier, right? And so they attract people who they use heroes, for example, to like athletes and celebrities to market their content. And then somehow they subliminally attract the everyday person that wants to be a hero. So I don't know, I think it's a combination. I wouldn't say emotional manipulation. I think it's really just being able to effectively tell a story and get people to empathize with you. But there certainly is a lot of like backhanded stuff out there for sure.
Well, yeah. And I was going to say, there's a certain aspect of like pulling that emotion out, right? It's like, actually you're pulling the hero out of that person. Actually, it's like everyone's got that hero in them or whatever. Right. So I think there's that, but the question was more actually about how do you measure that? Like how successful you are in pulling the hero out of them, for example, because it's not really, you can't like quantify. It's like, oh, I gave her like a 900 happiness today. It's kind of hard. I mean, you can measure it in likes on Facebook or whatever, but yeah.
Yeah, no, that's a really great question. I suppose that from a marketing standpoint, you would look at data and metrics, right? Like the actual information you're getting back, the feedback that you're getting back from the ads that you're running, or from the viewership or the engagement. But I think that if I speak for myself, when I'm helping a brand or a company with developing some sort of strategy to tap into the emotions of their customer base, I don't really know if I actually measure it or if I'm trying to measure it. I think instead, I'm trying to make it as real, raw, and authentic as possible for the consumer. For example, if one of the hotels down in Waikiki, their primary customer base is, families of 4 or something like that, then the imagery that we're trying to create is something that the average family, the nuclear family, is going to resonate with. But I'm not going into it with like, and I know what scale you're talking about, but I'm not really going into it with like, we're aiming for this particular like level of happiness or joy or, but good question. I might have to start looking at that a little bit more and incorporating it somehow into my strategy.
Yeah, I mean, I actually analyze data for a living, so it's part of the reason why I was asking, is because it's actually hard to quantify. But yeah, anyway, thank you. That's
no worries.
Very helpful. Yeah,
thank you.
Awesome, William. Thank you for the question, guys. If you have a question for Danny, just send me a message through the chat and I'll ask him. No worries. We want this session to be as interactive as possible. So if you have a question, just let me know. Danny, you talked about archetypes. And when you say the word archetypes, it's like, I think about like the archetypes that writers use for storytelling. Like in Star Wars, like Luke Skywalker is the hero, so on and so on and so on. How many archetypes are there and how can we use them in branding?
Well, as far as the number of archetypes, I think people will debate about that. One reference point that I use is the Hartford brand archetypes. I believe there are 12 or 13. And well, quite often you see, like in personality tests, there's like 12 or 13 personalities. But then you have something vast like the Myers-Briggs or Strength Finders, Gallup Strength Finders, or something like that. And there's tons and tons of different personalities and variations. But so I don't know if I could really quantify how many archetypes there are, but I would say that humanity does focus on several archetypes quite a bit, like the hero, like you mentioned, you know, and I think that stems from, if you look at the studies of like Joseph Campbell and Carl Jung, they, you know, Joseph Campbell has this book, the Hero of a Thousand Faces, and it's this idea that human beings, since the beginning of recorded history, have been obsessed with playing out certain roles, or at least fantasizing about certain roles, and the hero is one of them. And I think that is just something that's in our subconscious of us wanting to be a hero to some degree, or an ordinary person wanting to do something extraordinary. I'm not sure if I answered your question on health, but I think with archetypes, I would look at them as like people in a movie, like roles in a movie, and you got to have, you know, that the underdog, everyday kid. And look at most anime and manga. It's almost always the same story. It's some kid in high school who's kind of like not popular. He's got some asshole bully who just F's with them all the time, and he's got a crush on this like girl who's not really that hot, but she's kind of like the girl next door, like, you know, the innocent girl. It's the same story every single time. He's kind of a weak kid. He gets messed with a lot. He feels not confident in himself, and then something happens. He gets superpowers, or he has to stand up to somebody, or he overcomes overwhelming odds, right? It's the same damn story every single time. I don't know how we continue to sell the same story, but human beings love it. We eat that shit for breakfast, man. So it's not that difficult, I think, to really tap into that, man. That's why superhero movies are killing it right now, is because we want to be that to some degree. We want to do amazing things. And so if you look at social media, some of the greatest engagements on content marketing right now are stories of people doing kind of seemingly heroic things. Or if you look at advertising, brands are telling stories of, or using people who've done heroic things to represent their products. So,
do you think the impact of archetypes vary from culture to culture? And let me give you an example. A couple years ago, there was a movie called The Greatest Showman with Hugh Jackman. And that movie in America tanked. But in Japan, it was like so popular. Same as Bohemian Rhapsody. In America, it tanked. But in Japan, it was like the second coming of Jesus Christ. Like, everyone was talking about Bohemian Rhapsody. So, Danny, do you feel like these vary culture to culture? Like, for example, the hero archetype is more important in America, whereas in Japan, the everyday Joe is more important. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I think environment and socioeconomic status and demographics in general play a huge role in storytelling. But I think that archetypes are something that all human beings everywhere focus on. I think there's a lot of people in America, for example, that would resonate with the everyday Joe. Look at Peter Parker, just a punk kid in high school, right? Gets bit by a nuclear radiated spider and suddenly starts slinging webs out of his wrists. But yes, I see what you're saying, right? Is like, and I think the culture does play a role in that regard, because, you know, as much as Japan is amazing in things that it does, there is a very structured and orderly nature to the Japanese. If you compared Japan to America, America is like total chaos and Japan is total order, right? And they each have their benefits and drawbacks. And so, I think the main issue here with the Japanese culture in the context of this is that because they're so collective focused on, doing it for the collective, doing it for the rest of the nation, not about yourself. It's not about me. It's about we. That people maybe feel like they can do less heroic things, or there are less things to be heroic about, and the average Joe is probably more relatable, as opposed to America, which anybody and everybody can kind of get famous on YouTube or put themselves out there. There's more of like a kind of like a hero push, I think, with them, and America is more focused on the individual. It's all about me and not about we, right? So yeah, I think that they differ quite a bit, actually.
Awesome, perfect. We actually have a question from Michael. Michael, you have the floor.
Hey, what's going on, everybody? Thank you, Unhep, for another dope interview with Daniel. Appreciate you coming through and dropping some wisdom for us all. My question was, I was curious what you thought as an entrepreneur, and any entrepreneurs who are present right now, I would love your input if you think you have any. But do you think a foreign entrepreneur in Japan would have more of an advantage trying to sell a product or trying to sell a service, such as brand storytelling? Not only brand storytelling, but any type of service. And what else do you think Japanese businesses lack besides some emotional, quote unquote, intimacy with its customers and clients?
Well, Michael, thank you so much for those questions, man. Those are great questions. Yeah, I think foreigners honestly have a huge edge in Japan for most things. I mean, you're not going to be considered Japanese. I mean, that's out of the question, right? But I do think that sometimes the gaijin does get we get a pass on a lot of stuff. We don't have to follow such a strict protocol, and I think a lot of gaijin unfortunately take advantage of that in the wrong ways, and they abuse it. But I think as a professional and responsible gaijin that is going and with efforts of entrepreneurship in Japan, I think that they could sell products or services by, again, using the fact that they are, I wouldn't say more emotionally intelligent, but maybe a bit more confident in how they can deliver it. I think that emotional intelligence is kind of I wouldn't say touchy subject for the Japanese, but it's something that's maybe a bit more esoteric. And I think that it would take a bit more time for them to comprehend it, and you'd have to kind of explain things like emotions through logic and reason. I'm not sure if that makes any sense, but I think if you were to have I think your question is whether or not we would have an advantage trying to sell a product or trying to sell a service. Are you asking whether or not which one would be easier to sell? Or are you asking, would we just have an advantage at all in general? Could you clarify that for me?
Yeah, which one would be easier?
Would be easier. I think a service, to be honest. I think the Japanese are already like the pros at selling products, man. They beat it into you every 2 seconds. I mean, you just go on the metro, go on the subway, walk down the street. I mean, they're all about data. At the same time, though, if you utilized your emotional intelligence to sell that product, hell, you might be better at selling the product. I think Japanese are actually much more susceptible to being sold something tangible than something intangible. So yeah, probably a product, and now that I think about it, might be easier if you took an emotionally intelligent approach to selling it. I think, for example, brand storytelling I'm gonna experience a lot of difficulties selling this service to the Japanese. So I have to explore ways to actually kind of meet them halfway, meaning I would have to find ways to show data around intelligence. I would have emotional intelligence. I would have to find ways to show the results that I've garnered from previous clients and how that applied, and the strategies that I used, and then sell them on the actual tangible deliverables, like the strategies and the bullet points, basically. But I don't think I could ever sell them on the feelings. And your second question was, what else are Japanese businesses lacking besides some emotional intimacy from its customers? I think a greater understanding of branding. And what I mean by branding is, I think when people hear the word branding, they think strictly of like logos and some of the typefaces used, and the aesthetics are important, but branding is so much more than just the design. If you look at the word brand itself, it's like a cattle brand, right? You take it, you brand it onto the back of the cow, that's your cow. And it's usually something unique so that everybody knows that that's your cow. And great brands can take that logo and stick it on anything and sell it. The Japanese, unfortunately, they're not like, for example, Matsuya, which is the really popular, like gyudon franchise or restaurant place. They can't take their logo and stick it on a t-shirt and sell it. But Nike can take their little swoosh and they can put it on cell phones, they can put it on shoes, they can put it on clothes, they can put it on a mug. I would drink out of that. I think Japanese need to focus a bit more on the science behind the branding too. Everything from color psychology into the color palettes. Each of those colors create an actual chemical response in our brain, make us feel a certain way, whether we believe it or not. I wore a red shirt today to make myself pop a bit, be a little bit more bold and aggressive. If I wanted to wear my yellow one, it would make me appear a little bit more cheery and optimistic, but right now I'm trying to label myself as a bit of a rebel. So I think that Japanese are kind of playing it too safe with their branding. A lot of pastel colors, a lot of kind of dull colors, not enough unique logos that actually mean something or that have deeper, not just context, but subtext. I hope that answers your question, bro. Apologies for taking so long.
Oh, it's okay. I appreciate it. And if Matsuya started selling merch, I'd probably buy it because I eat there too much.
Yeah. I would too, man, because I have great experiences eating there. And that's the point I'm trying to make, is that it's about the experience you're having there. And Japan isn't selling you on experience. They're selling you on the tangible. They're selling you on the actual gyudon itself. And all I know is that when I eat there, man, I'm in heaven, even though it's super cheap and probably not up to standards for a lot of Japanese, but
that's fast food in my opinion. So.
You good?
Oh, it seems like I've already spoken. Seema, do you want to go?
Thank you. Thanks for that, Will. Daniel, so I have another question. So, like, what I want to ask is kind of like, do you think Japanese companies tend to focus more on brand loyalty and like on customer service rather than the initial marketing? Because I think maybe that's what they try focus their energy on. Instead of trying to tell their story, they're trying to focus on, okay, we've got this customer now, let's keep this customer, instead of trying, let's get new customers. And then at the same time, I have seen some funny Japanese adverts that kind of make me want to go find out about the product. And as soon as you started mentioning like storytelling, the first one that came to mind was, there's one with like this gummy thing, like the long man one. I'm sure most people have seen it. And there's like a whole YouTube story. I had to go find it to watch it just because I thought it was funny. And I think it is coming along in terms of like, they're starting to realize storytelling, but they're still focused on keeping that customer? Like, what do you think of that? What's your opinion?
Yeah, no, I think that you're actually pretty spot on with how the Japanese, I was actually just talking with Angel about this recently, is that not only are Japanese focused on the product that they're trying to sell or the specs or the features, but in terms of actual target demographics, it's, look at a Western brand, they will cater to the experiences of like an age group or a socioeconomic status, but the Japanese seem to target based off of like, we know the people that buy our products are between this age and this age, this particular gender, and then they, oh man, how do I describe this? It's like they've catered their adverts to, I kind of look at like almost like a click funnel. I don't know if that's a good visual. They rope you in with something they know you're gonna like, and then they get you to kind of like, they bait you to kind of continue to pursue it, and then you follow along with it, and then you get to the point, and then they ask you for a sale. I feel like Western brands are kind of in your face from the very beginning. A bit more abrasive in their storytelling and less mystery. I love when some of those advertisements that you're talking about in Japanese, where they do something ridiculous, like that, what was it? Pineapple pen, like just weird shit, man, like totally fucking bizarre. But hell, man, that went viral. Like Japanese have this really brilliant way of creating some zany ass content that just ropes people in. And I actually haven't figured out exactly what that is, like psychologically, like on a consumer psychology level. It might just be shock value. I don't know. It's just so weird that you have to click it. But hey, man, if it works, it works. I just find that I think that Japanese marketing is a bit more mysterious, and I do agree with you that they focus on the customer service aspect. I think that they're less concerned about generating leads and more about nurturing the relationships they already have and continuing to build that. As opposed to Western brands, which I think focus more about just grabbing people's attention, keeping it as long as they can to make a sale, and then focusing on brand loyalty. I don't know if that answers your question, man.
No, thanks. It kind of does. Thank you.
Cool.
All right, William, go ahead.
Yeah, so it's, just hearing a lot of the foreigners' perspective on the Japanese commercials, I realize how much I can really see things from both sides, both perspectives. I'm half Japanese as well, and it's really interesting because like the whole pineapple. I don't even know what my friend was actually working with the guy, but anyway, it's just I feel like a lot of this actually has to do with the emotional climate, basically. Like, where in America, it's like, it's such a, pardon the French, it's like society itself is such a shit show that like, it's like we need heroes here, basically. Whereas in Japan, it's like, it's so damn peaceful. Like, it's like, I mean, everyone's kind of heroic by like being able to keep their shit together every day, basically. So it's like being a hero is kind of granted. And, if you do something really miraculous, it's like, well, you're just doing your civic duties, it's no big deal. Like, just move on. Right. And I think in that sense, it's, because of it's more of like the default mode or emotion that's felt in Japan is like a sense of like peace and serenity or something. Obviously it depends on where you are and what type of person you are, but it seems like that's held as like almost the highest ideal, so to speak. Mm-hmm. And therefore anything that's sort of disruptive in like a positive way of that piece, meaning like, you know, it's just like, and I think that's where this like, that's where like all this absurd humor comes really into play, because the default is like peace and like nothing. I mean, there's exciting things happening, but like what really gets the gears turning is like something that's completely like unexpected, totally out of the blue. And you're just like, you just have to stop, and you're like, that it's like a glitch in the matrix. So you're like, did that just really happen? And then, you know, and then it really draws your attention. I wanted to say, like, I was going down Omotesando station the other day, and I saw this huge ad, and it was like right at the bottom of the escalator, at the, like on the main escalator, right in front of like a Kinokuniya or something, which is like a really, you know, it's a relatively high-end supermarket in Japan. And it's just like a huge red billboard with a ferret, like a white ferret, just standing there looking at you. And it's like a 3-minute text wall basically. And it says, and the first line it starts is like, we know you're not going to read this, or it's like, we know words. I can't remember what it said, something along the lines of like, we know that like your attention doesn't last long, so we're just going to write whatever the hell we want. Like, that's literally how it started. We're going to just write whatever we want because we know a lot of you guys aren't paying attention anyway. And then that's like the shock value. You're like, oh, okay, like, you know, and it's appealing to the general consumer market of like, there's too much shit going on, no one's paying attention, everyone just wants to just zone out on their smartphones, and anything that's remotely resembling nature or peace, which is like totally, you know, like Tokyo lacks basically. It's like, oh wow, it's like a nice ferret in the middle of the train. And then it talks about, you know, all these like really random stuff about like the people that are running the business and how they love ferrets and stuff. And then, you know, that's like 2/3 into the thing. And then finally it's like, and, you know, because we love peace and like, you know, these are the values that we have, you know, you should check this out if you have time. And then they just give you a link for, it's not even like, they didn't even tell you what the service actually is. It's just like, check our website out if you're interested. And that's how it ends. And it's just like one animal. But the shock value in that, it's like, oh wow, like that's something that like kind of tickles my heart. Whereas in the States, it's like, poof, like news flash, right? Like, you know, you can be a hero today or something, or you can save the world or whatever. It's so different. But I feel like the impact aspect of it is very much the same. And that has more to do with the nature of advertising and how our attention is like diversified in the digital era. And so I think there's a lot of things that are common across Western or Japanese culture, American culture, in that we're all using smartphones, we're all using computers, everyone's using Facebook, everyone's using Line, everyone's on, you know, whatever. But the emotional climate is very different. And therefore the shock value that's presented is also different. And then the way that, you know, that the way that you can gain attention is therefore also going to be different. And I think that's also a very interesting sort of aspect of the culture to really focus on, is that it may not actually be about the marketing. It may be about like what you're actually trying to market to or for, and which is actually creating value basically. And the value that's created actually depends on the context, right? You don't need a hero when there's nothing happening. Like it's kind of boring actually, right? Yeah.
Right. No, thank you for that. I look, I couldn't agree with you more. I mean, I'm glad you brought that up because you know, Angel and I have had many conversations about this, and I was looking for an opportunity to kind of get into this. But the entire reason that I think that there's such a vastly different approach to marketing between Eastern and Western audiences, well, specifically Japanese and Western audiences, is that emotional context of or the emotional environment, or actually I can't remember the exact word that you used, but it's look, Japan, like I said, very collective focused, very orderly, very, you know, very well behaved. And, you know, with that comes this expectation of being and, you know, when that is kind of expected of you and that's the norm, anything that disrupts that is against the machine. It's like a monkey wrench thrown into there. And, unfortunately, I mean, while it has great benefits in marketing when you kind of throw that bizarre ferret into their faces, at the same time, societally, it causes issues, right? So, and, you know, I have so much love and respect when I talk about this, but, you know, Japan has the highest suicide rate in the world per capita, and one of the lowest birth rates in the world as well per capita. And these are very serious issues. But again, I think what it really boils down to is being able to address the individual in some kind of way. The problem with America is it's too much individualism, and the monkey wrench that we get thrown into is like not this bizarre funny stuff. It's serious accusations and cancel culture and really difficult things to talk about, like racism and sexism and prejudice. That stuff sells right now. That's making the headlines, and we're using these really awful things to market agendas. In Japan, it's like silly shit and humor and bizarre and weird fetishes and all this stuff. But I think that's brought on by the fact that the majority of Japanese people feel a bit trapped, maybe emotionally repressed, and to no fault of their own. It's just something I think that's happening through, decades, possibly centuries of certain expectations being set. And so I think the reason, again, that their marketing is has gotten vanilla, if you will, is because it's uncomfortable to have those emotional conversations. In my travels to Japan and doing business out there, nobody wants to hear, or they get very uncomfortable when they hear my past story. I spent 3 years homeless on the streets, and it was eaten out of a garbage can, and I suffered, and I was addicted to drugs and alcohol. And believe it or not, I used to weigh 370 pounds. I was huge. And so they feel very sorry for me. And at the same time, it kind of spirals them into a weird uncomfortableness, because nobody really shares that much about themselves in Japan, right? So I think, again, the reason that they're so obsessed with Western European brands is an outlet for them. It's a way for them to connect to this identity that they have deep inside that they're not able to tap into, and or at least not publicly. And that's why they obsess over, again, the underdog kid in the anime or the manga, and that any kind of like glitch in the matrix just throws them totally for the loop because of the monotony of everyday culture. And again, if you just picture walking down the street and there's all these blinding lights that are just pummeling you with the same verbiage over and over and over again. Sale, buy now. I mean, have you ever just walked down the street and heard those girls on the microphone? They all sound the same. And they kind of sound like monotone voice. It's almost like listening to Ben Stein in Ferris Bueller's Day Off. Hey, class. It's like it, or Charlie Brown, the adults. Wah, 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 wah. You start to drown it out. So anything that kind of just comes in, ferret. It's like, as opposed to hearing wah, 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 like that's going to grab your attention, right? In America, man, it's not monotony that's getting us. It's just way too much chaos. I think we could learn a lot from the Japanese with the peace and the calm and the serenity. And we need to focus on that more. I think, to be honest, the ideal utopia of society is meshed somewhere in between Japan and the US, but leans further to Japan.
Yeah, I think, being half Japanese, half American, I could definitely, I really see where that's coming from. Like I could see like how a lot of cancel culture can really take off in Japan too. Like there's a lot of shit that's got to go, and it's actually a really great way to sort of, because after all, Japan is somewhat modeling after the West, right? And this goes back to Japanese history, and which you and I are both part of, and a lot of people are kind of experiencing, the aftermath of what happened, within our ancestors' generations and stuff. But the general trend of society and the economy and capitalism in general is still the same, because the driving forces are the same. We're talking about finance, economics, and so on and so forth. So, but culture itself is very unique because it goes deeper into it's underneath the economic structure. You're talking about sociology, you're talking about politics, religion, all sorts of history, things like that. And I these days, like I went to California recently, and everyone's, I think the whole what are they called, like the electric not scooters, what are they called? Electric kickboards. Like that was like 10 years ago, but like I'm finally seeing them kind of like making it on the streets in Tokyo now. I live in Shibuya, and it's like, oh wow, like, it really is like the Japanese people, they get so sick of the Matrix in Japan, they leave for like LA or something, or Hawaii. They are like, oh wow, like look at what the Americans are doing, that's so cool, let me try to bring this back into Japan. And then a few rebels start it, and then boom, like suddenly it takes off because like someone picks up on like the new trend, and then that's how it is. And like I can see like this conversation, it's like 5 years from now, it's like, oh wow, cancel culture is everywhere now. But that might have already faded out in the States, and then now because of this conversation, the States is like, oh, we should adopt more of like a harmonious kind of values that Japan has, and all of a sudden you see ferrets everywhere, or
Right.
something like that. Yeah.
No, I agree with you, man. And I think that I do actually believe that like Japan I wouldn't say like 10 years behind everybody, because that's not the right way to illustrate that. But I feel like you said, it's a break in the monotony when they observe what the Americans are doing, and they take what's useful and discard what's not. But they, the hero archetypes, it's antithesis, it's opposite, it's diametrically opposed to the everyday guy and gal. Like each of these brand archetypes, if you go onto like the Hartford brand study, like there's 12 of them, and then you'll find one that is opposite of another. So like makes total sense to me that the individualist country is going to attract the collectivist country, so they're looking for the rebel. That's why like all you foreigner guys are like, you can, this is going to sound kind of chauvinistic, and it's not intended to be, but there's like a default level of attractiveness that you meet just through your baseline confidence, because everybody else is kind of conforming. You're like the one non-conformist just by default, even though you're there to, be respectful of the culture and everything. You carry yourself a little bit more confidently, right? I know that Herb has a question. In Japan and China, the demographics are aging. How does this affect your marketing strategy? Well, it absolutely does, man. I mean, Japan has one of the largest, elderly populations in the world. It's like, I don't know exactly what the ratio is, but I would imagine it's close to 50%, if not more. And same with China. Italy also has a really large elderly population. So does it affect the marketing strategy? Yeah, I mean, out here in Hawaii, it's a bit different. I do a lot of marketing for the hotels and resorts, and most people that can afford to fly out to Hawaii and stay in a 5-star hotel are the older people. So I do a lot of working on the demographics of, either young professionals or older. But I would imagine that with the aging population of Japan, one, you're going to start seeing, and this is why those ferret ads are popping up, because some old guy at Dentsu is not responsible for that shit. It's some young buck, man, some young, like just zany throwing in some sort of monkey wrench and seeing the kind of results, right? So I think that you're going to start seeing here pretty soon, because let's be honest, man, the old ways are dying. Like what I mean by old ways is old people that are just kind of holding society back. Just old ways of thinking, narrow ways of thinking, and not necessarily wrong. I'm not challenging any kind of tradition or heritage. I just think that the world is evolving. And I think that in marketing, you have to adapt or be eliminated. Kodak is a great example of a brand that absolutely just fucking failed at adapting to everything. Kodak was huge, man, when I was a kid in the 90s. And it didn't go digital, man. It just didn't go fully digital. It didn't go online. It didn't try to build a social presence. It didn't invest in storytelling the right way. And it's just a shell of its former self. Personally, I think that the closest thing Japan has to a brand is Uniqlo, because the Uniqlo out here is, I mean, they're doing well out here in Hawaii. But I do know that I think that the CEO is like Korean, so maybe that might, or half Korean or something. I don't know. But but you don't really see any other Japanese brands out here. You see your Sony and Toyota, but again, they're known for the products that they create. But there's no brands out here. There's no Japanese brands out here.
And even Uniqlo, right? It's like unique clothing. Like
yeah,
you got
yeah,
yeah.
Yeah. I mean, well, look at how Japanese obsess over The Great Showman, like Angel mentioned, right? Or Bohemian Rhapsody. The entire concept of both of those movies is individuality, authenticity, being unforgivingly yourself. Like, that's not something that Japanese people do. And I don't know if they know why they're attracted to these movies. I don't think they do. I think it's a subliminal thing for them. But I think that it's great. It's a great case study on how we can really improve the Japanese market. I mean, I know you guys aren't out there to exploit the Japanese nation. I know you're out there to improve it as best as you can. Me too. And again, we're not gonna be able to penetrate the Japanese market with something like brand storytelling if we don't approach it from improving Japan and improving upon what they already have. And I think it's just a matter of showing them things like that. It's like, why did the Japanese consumer focus on this? Well, it's because they want more of this. Random ferrets against red backgrounds and traveling freak show, circus show, celebrating who they are. Or Freddie Mercury. I mean, everybody loves Freddie Mercury. Come on. If you hate Freddie Mercury, it's like something seriously wrong with you. But I think that we could also learn a lot from the Japanese, because America and Western culture has become so focused on individuality that we can't even say he, she, him. Like, pronouns are a huge argument right now. And nobody, or the majority of people, don't even mean to offend, and people are becoming offended. I agree with you. I can see how that would eventually cancel culture could totally take over Japan. So we got to be careful how we penetrate the market with this, because I'm telling you, man, in the next 10 years, we're going to be seeing a lot of storytelling in Japan. And I think it's going to be something we've never seen before. It's going to be some weird variation, totally different than the Western side. It's going to be like Japanese infused, ferret infused. I'm going to continue to use ferrets now, dude, for the rest of time when I talk about this stuff, because it's the perfect example. It's just bizarre.
And do you think that Western brands therefore have to market differently in Japan? And also, do you think that Japanese brands, if they want to be successful in the global market, have to actually adapt their strategy? So both sides?
Yeah, they're both going to have to evolve for sure. I think that actually, I think America's going to have to tone it down a bit. I think Western culture is going too far, and they're pissing a lot of people off. And they're going to ostracize their entire customer base. I mean, you're already seeing brands apologize about something that's not even their fault. It's just like somebody that was wearing their uniform. And after a while, I think a nation or a people end up getting sick and tired of something. And I think you're going to see the pendulum swing back eventually. Not all the way back, of course. We're not going to regress into some, thing from like hundreds of years ago. But I do think it's going to tone back a bit more, and we're going to even out. But at the same time, when you have something that's totally chaotic, it'll lean back into order. Something that's all about order, like Japan, it's going to get a little crazier. So, let's see here. It says, try to buy other companies instead of creating for themselves. Right. And yeah, so I mean, again, Japanese, being a brandless nation, is the obsession of improving upon something tends to get in the way of innovation. So if you're just focused on improving something that's already there, you're not really thinking of anything new, which is another main differentiator. I think the problem with America is that we don't fix the shit that's already broken. We just create new stuff, and then we just have a bunch of broken shit laying around. That's America's main problem. We have way too many systems that don't work, and no way to fix it because we're already pouring all of our money, time, and resources into creating the next thing.
So Danny, let me ask you a question real quick.
Sure.
Let's say I want to start my own company and I need some help with branding. Where do I start?
Cool. So this is kind of proprietary. It's not something that you really can find online, but I tend to call it a brand identity, right? So you think of it like an actual person or something living and breathing. And I would separate it into three parts, your brand, right? I would have the brand concept, which includes like your mission and your vision and your core values and your brand archetype and a primary archetype and a secondary archetype and a tertiary archetype, right? This is like the origin point of your brand. It's the main squeeze. It's the core of your brand. Then I would have my brand narrative. Brand narrative is the story. It's the driving force of the brand concept. It's the way that you have illustrated all of this over here in the brand concept in a way that is relatable to those archetypes that you have, right? And in a narrative format. You see a lot of American products right now, especially in the organic and natural foods realm, talking about the origin story. My great-grandpappy came out here in 1812 and had a potato farm, and he's a family man, and he's, and they include that on the label. It's like, there's no nutrition label. It's like this small, but like the whole thing is just this origin story and how they're relating to people. And we're committed to the best quality products. You don't see that in Japan. You don't see the brand narrative. That, to me, which is the storytelling, again, it's there to make you empathize and connect and relate. That is what Western brands have really got going, is that second part. Last part is the brand aesthetic. It's the look, the feel, the color palette, which is designed with the color psychology in mind of, again, the narrative and the concept. So you don't want to pick colors, for example, with your brand that piss off the people you're trying to sell, right? So like reds, bold, aggressive. If you're designing an eco-friendly company, you don't want any reds in there. You're going to piss a lot of people off. And people seem to think that green is the reason the eco-friendly companies choose because it's like grass. And no, green just in our brains actually creates a friendly, warm, inviting sensation. While reds, just like a bull, tend to piss us off if used incorrectly. Or in your case, draw your attention to a fucking ferret in the middle of Tokyo. Apologies for the language. I'm just being as authentic as I possibly can. But if you have, you'll notice that some of the more successful brands in the world right now, you're going to see this eventually with Angel and I at some point, are focused on purple. Look, purple is the only color that we make up completely in our minds. And there's science to support this. And I would encourage you to go and investigate after we're done here. But there are no purple photons. When light hits something that's purple, it's actually the absence of green. It's something that we've completely orchestrated in our heads because there's no other way to compute it through the way light interacts with it. If you look at most popular brands like Apple, they use a shit ton of purple. And there is a particular company that I think we were going to talk about eventually on Hell, but Rakuten, which has kind of been causing waves in Japan and dominating internationally. They use a lot of purple. They've figured something out. A lot of the most successful brands are using purple because it evokes creativity. It's the artist's color. It's also why kings and queens and royalty and people of regal status use purple. This is not a new thing. People have known about this for a very long time. Color psychology is a real deal, unless you're colorblind. but most people aren't. So let's not go there. But these colors really do create sales. Their conversions. Like when people want to stress to you that something is limited time, it's usually in red or yellow, right? Red being bold and aggressive, yellow being like a sense of urgency, energetic. Orange is also energetic, but kind of like more like optimistic. You know, blues are cool, calm, and collected. Blues calm us down, right? So I see a lot of oranges in Japan. I actually see a lot of reds too. And it's like the only way that they can kind of like grab your attention from the monotony going on around you. But Japan also has a lot of grays and blacks and pastel colors. And it's like, it just all blends into peripheral, right? Japan, if you go into Tokyo, there's barely any purple. And that literally activates your artistry, your creativity. This is why Japanese people, in my opinion, aren't innovating as much. They're not branding in a way that evokes creativity from people. That was a bit of a rant. Sorry.
Is it okay if I comment here, Andrew?
Go for it.
Yeah, like there's a new building called the Parco building in Shibuya. They just opened. It's in the heart of Shibuya. And there's a pretty cool Pokemon center with a Mewtwo, which is purple. So that's pretty fucking awesome. It's actually a graffiti, and it's really, really awesome. So, but aside from that, like I walked through the whole place, and I mean, there are some places that are really, really nice there, but I can't tell you how disappointed I was. And I continue to be disappointed in Japan by all the branding here, because like you said, just nothing really, there's no message. It's like all the names are very abstract. They do use English, but it's kind of nonsensical, and it kind of makes me wonder, like, who did they even consult, and who's their target audience, And I still struggle to this day, because like even walking down Harajuku or something, I have no idea who's actually buying any of these brands or clothes. I see people window shopping, but I never really see like huge lines, of people like waiting to get the next pair of shoes from whatever. Like it's always Nike or whatever. I used to live right next to a Nike lab in Omotesando, and I shit you not, I saw 1,000 Chinese people lining up to get the next branded shoe, because if you get one of those and you score one of those and you send them back to China, you can sell that thing for like 100 times its price, because you can just mass manufacture it without any, by completely bypassing all copyright laws or trademarking. And it's just so, seeing the market in like real life, like affecting human behavior that way, it's really, really is, it's really surprising. And the only driver being the message is also kind of absurd. It's like, just do it, It's like, just do it. Just, you Chinese person, just go get that new shoe, But, similarly with just these Japanese brands, it's like, I can't even tell you a single brand after having been in that building that I remember. Like, and it's just the way it is. I read Japanese, I can speak to these people, but I would never stop by. And it's just because it's not really that their product is bad. I'm sure they actually spend a lot of time, because, Japanese quality is actually really, really good. And the way that they design things is also very good. It's just that it doesn't really stand out. And it's really I think it's really just the intent and the message. It's like, I don't really know what these people, they're actually intending when they actually release these products. I don't really get a feeling of their intention. And I think that's why they're having to resort to things like shock value. It's like, oh my God, you are a ferret? Like, really? Yeah.
Yeah, man, it's the emotional disconnect. It is. It's the emotional disconnect, or the
association.
Yeah, right. It's people want to feel. Look, we're human beings, man. We bleed the same blood, regardless of race and religion and sex and all these different things. And what connects us is honestly suffering. It's the fact that we feel that we and we can't understand concepts like love, which are very esoteric, if we don't have anything to juxtapose it to, right? We need that comparison. And what I'm noticing in Japan after observing it for many years and just, I mean, I'm passionate about studying this, is that there's not enough marketing out there, not enough storytelling that is getting people to feel anything in Japan. And, you know, I think our responsibility as foreigners in Japan or even outside of Japan is to bring that empathy to Japan. I think what Japan is missing right now is empathy. And, you know, foreigners, I think we get, like, they want us there, and at the same time they don't, because they feel so disconnected from us, so far apart from the way that most of us are. And don't get me wrong, some foreigners are maybe lean more towards Eastern culture than they do Western culture, and so maybe they're more alike to the Japanese than most Westerners. But I feel like the reason they obsess over foreigners too is because we represent something that they wish they could tap into or they want to learn from. You see it all the time. Look, Hawaii is what I would call third Japan, because Okinawa is like second Japan. I would never say that to an Okinawan because they'd be pissed. But like we have probably the single largest population of Japanese people outside of, I mean, that's the reason I'm here. I exist because of the immigration to Hawaii. And I see it. I'm bombarded with Japanese marketing here in Hawaii because they're our #1 tourist demographic. And it's so interesting being Hafu because I grew up with Japanese culture in the household. I grew up with my mother I love her to death. I hope she never watches this. But it's very hard to connect to her on an emotional level. My mom wasn't raised with PDAs. She doesn't hug me or kiss me. She doesn't tell me she loves me. And I know she does. And there's nothing in particularly wrong with that. But what I found is that because my mom wasn't raised with those values, she loves watching YouTube videos that make her cry and Korean dramas, right? So she's actively seeking out to fill the void. And so Japanese people, what I've noticed is that they obsess over Western brands to fill the void, the emotional void that they're experiencing being in Japan. Look, they're the first people to line up for the new iPhone, and they can't even pay their rent next month. They're still lined up around the block. I used to be the general manager at an Abercrombie and Fitch down here, and we're not even a flagship store, but we would decimate the sales with the flagship stores in New York and California during Golden Week in Japan. So the Japanese would come from Golden Week, they'd fly down to Hawaii, and they'd blow like 10 grand at Abercrombie and Fitch in Hawaii. We would destroy numbers so catastrophically that corporate would like call us and be like, what the fuck? How did you guys just make like your entire monthly, sales goal in one day? And it's because they love Abercrombie and Fitch so much. And, Hawaii is just a 5-hour flight, 6-hour flight away. And it doesn't, it's not as expensive because everything's imported to Japan. It's like a t-shirt's like $50 there. In Hawaii, it's like 25. But I'll tell you, looking at the brand Bible for Abercrombie and Fitch, when I would be back there in the office, they had this thing called the 5 brand senses. I don't know if I can get in trouble for sharing this, to be honest, because I'm pretty sure it was like all sensitive information, but they would literally orchestrate and engineer the entire store experience into senses. So like they would spritz that really annoying fierce cologne out of the spritzer right in the corners of the room so that you associate the experience with that scent. And they would also put the softest clothes up in the front available for you to touch and experience. The lighting was every month we'd have to change it multiple times and set up the lights specifically so that they shone on certain areas of the store to guide you through the store to a particular area where there was a sale that they wanted to push. And then you couldn't do taste in something like Abercrombie and Fitch, so they replaced it with energy. And so the way they tapped into energy was those half-naked models that they had standing outside, like not wearing a shirt or something like that. And they would greet you like, hey, how's it going, guys? Like they had scripted greetings. Like the handsome dude would literally look at the customer and be like, how you doing? Like, it was all scripted to make you feel a certain way and feel special. And Japanese bought into that. They loved that. They would come into that Abercrombie and Fitch to have the experience of being in an Abercrombie and Fitch. And they were just taking selfies, and then they would walk out with 6 or 7 bags of Abercrombie and Fitch. So I can't stress it enough, man. The Japanese are looking for more experiential stuff. Things that make them feel, things that make them desire. Just go ask a Japanese kid what his dream is, and he'll sit there and fumble for 20 minutes because nobody's ever asked him that before. Is there any data on whether the ferret ad is driving sales? Oh, I wouldn't know, but I would love to know that. I have no idea, but yeah, cool.
Yeah, is the ferret, there was this like Nissan commercial in the United States that won all these awards, but no one ever remembered what the product was. Is that kind of thing also happening? I think that happens a lot here. You market the product and you attach it with some famous person, and everyone remembers him, the famous person, but doesn't remember the product, which doesn't drive sales.
Yeah, well, they're doing that a lot in the Super Bowl.
Yes.
No, I shit you not. It's incredible. Like, you'll see a 3-minute commercial and you'll have no idea what they're selling you. And to the very end, it's like a story about a boy and his dog traveling across the country, and there's a lot of heartache. And at the very end, it's like, buy the new iPhone 10. And it's like, what does this have to do with iPhones? But here's the thing, they made me cry. So now whether I realize it or not, I have some sort of chemicals flooding my brain that are making me feel all warm and fuzzy. And I am subconsciously attaching some brand loyalty to Apple. They didn't actually make a commercial like this. I'm just creating a hypothetical. But the point I'm trying to make is you see that a lot, where they don't want you to feel like you're being sold. And I think that's another thing is, right away when Japanese are trying to sell you something. Like, they kind of just come up to you and sell it to you right away. But Western brands they just will tell a story. Then they just put the brand name at the end, and they didn't even tell you what the special was. All of a sudden, they've gained new followers. So I don't know, man. I don't know what ferret's selling, but I'll buy some.
I was gonna say, I also wanted to ask you, because this kind of gets into branding, or I guess advertising more. I mean, how much ad stuff do you also do with regards to branding? Is that I assume it's a huge part of it, but how much of it is more storytelling versus the actual advertising?
Right. Well, a lot of the campaigns that we work on end up being kind of meshed into the ads, or we'll create ads. I guess it depends on what kind of ads, right? Whether it's like actual social media ads, which can only capture somebody's attention span for maybe like 5 to 10 seconds. So they're pretty short video ads, if not. But what I'm finding, at least in the Western culture, is through ads, people want to see real, tangible people and less commercials. Meaning they've got this stuff called like user-generated content. So like, about influencer marketing, right? I'm sure you've heard about it at the very least. And that's huge here. And brands are realizing more and more that instead of paying for a Super Bowl commercial for $20 million, they're paying some Instagram influencer with, 500,000 organic reach that they've built themselves that is directly their target audience. And they're paying that person $5,000, $10,000, and then they're sending them some product. They get a much greater return than just shooting in the dark or doing some general like spray fire into a direction hoping they hit. And what I've noticed with the Japanese is sometimes their shit doesn't seem targeted at all. It's just like the tissue papers that are handed out on the streets or the flyers. And it's like, there's no rhyme or reason to who they're handing them out to. Right. And I would love to get numbers back on that, because I would love to see if they have a return of investment on those tissues, or how many leads they get from it. But people are starting to find that the ads are much more relatable when somebody you follow and you look up to and that you engage with day is like, oh my God, I've just bought this new purse and I absolutely love it. And it's the best purse. And next thing you know, they just sold 300 of those purses because that one person was using the purse.
And have you, I mean, I'm assuming you all know this, but it's like, I heard something, I think it was like a couple of years ago or something, about how if you're watching like a horror or any kind of like action film, or like any kind of like violent film, basically they tend to put in commercials like shampoo commercials, because it subconsciously sends a message of safety amidst the violence. And as a result, whenever they, and I think the ferret is kind of the same idea, is basically like, hey, if a guy was like trying to jump off, I'm not trying to make a joke out of this because it's a really serious deal, but like, you'd probably save a ferret more than you'd save the salaryman next to you that seems like he's suicidal. It's really paradoxical and really sad, but it does actually say a lot about the culture, and what the culture is actually craving for and needing is this sense of, fuzzy warmness, because it's such, everyone's like living in this machine basically, and no one knows what's going on anymore. It's very sad. And at the same time, when you go to a place like Akihabara, totally different culture. That's another thing that I actually wanted to talk to you about, is like subcultures. Different subcultures react differently, and the Akihabara subculture will completely not react to like a Harajuku culture, for example, because it's like they're only paying attention to the animes or whatever it is that they're paying attention to. If it's not a character that they recognize, it's not even human, it's just like a cartoon, right? It's like they don't even pay attention to it anymore because it doesn't really resonate with them. And what do you have to say on that, like different subcultures? And yeah.
Well, I think it's actually, I know there's a question here in the comments that I think actually ties into my answer for you, William. And I think it's, is it Hua or Hoa? I apologize if I'm butchering the name. And the question is, what would be the key element do you think to break the wall in the Japanese market where people want to seek for emotions but can't really accept it collectively? So you just mentioned cosplay, and look at what cosplay is. It's self-expression. I think that in order for that wall to be broken for the Japanese, as marketers or as storytellers or anybody who works remotely in these industries would have to create vehicles for self-expression. Because we can't go into the Japanese market telling the Japanese what to do. They hate that shit. I mean, I don't like to be told what to do. I haven't liked that since I was a kid, and my Japanese mom telling me what to do, Nobody wants to be sold on things either. Nobody likes to be, I hate it when people come to my door or send me spam mail, right? So it would have to be an outlet. It would have to be something that isn't so abrasive, but allows them to be the one to do it. Not somebody telling them to do something or daring them to do it or pressuring them to do it. I think one of the brilliant things about like otaku culture to some degree, without it being so, I think people have made like the true otakus out to be kind of like social rejects or hermits or something. But in reality, a lot of them, in my opinion, are being some of the most authentic people they can possibly be, because they've adopted a way, or they've created a way to express themselves, even if it's just through an anime or a manga or a video game. And then they go out and dress up like it. They're being the heroes that they wish they could be. So I guess to answer both of your questions with subcultures and whatnot, we would have to work with the Japanese to create systems and vehicles that allow them to express themselves, the consumer themselves now, the consumer, not the brand itself, but the brand would basically offer an opportunity to the consumer to express themselves, whether through creating campaigns that engage the consumer to some degree and ask them to do something, because what that creates is something called situational competence. It allows for people to, let's put it this way, if I was wearing a uniform, if I was working for Uniqlo, for example, I'm going to be more confident when I'm at work with that uniform on, because I have some sort of authority, something is kind of like self and the consumer. I have like there's like a barrier there. And so I guess what I'm trying to say is for people who are trying to delve more into self-expression when they're not used to any self-expression at all, there has to be a layer there that provides some confidence, that allows them to express openly, but maybe not that much, not all the way. So I think that that way it becomes more like they're being asked to do something than it is for them to accept it collectively. Odin says there are many Japanese websites which look like they come out straight from the early 2000s. Yeah, definitely good designers. So what do you think is the main reason why Japanese pay so little attention to branding sometimes? Again, man, I just don't think there's enough data for them to reference, because no Japanese brands are really investing in storytelling and nobody's really investing in emotional metrics. And Japanese are very data driven. And so with no data to reference, I feel like they have nothing to juxtapose it next to. Go ahead, man. Go for it. Were you going to speak?
Yeah, so that was my question. So I wonder why they don't just use the same good designs. They definitely have the designers. They have an examples, but they don't use it. They just put a lot of data, but no good design, good content to look at. So why so? Just wonder.
You know, man, I wish I could give you a straightforward answer. I just think that they do not know what they do not know. It's like, this is kind of the way that it's been done since the advent of the internet for them. And they've become somewhat jaded, and there's also this element of having to try something new and possibly failing. And I think that puts a lot of pressure on a conformist society. And I empathize with that completely. I think, you know, as being somebody who played it pretty safe during my childhood and adolescence, and then to go out into the world, and then I ended up eating out of a garbage can for 3 years. It shattered every thing that I had ever known. Like, there was no room for cognitive dissonance. There was no room for, it's like I had to rebuild my perspective of the world, right? So I think that risk-taking is it's advised against in Japanese marketing. And so what I would encourage Japanese marketers to do is to be bold, do something different, even if that's just starting with taking a different way home from work. You know, you have to ease into it with baby steps. And I think as marketers and storytellers in Japan, instead of doing a drastic overhaul with something like a website, maybe start incorporating small little things here and there. And eventually over time, we'll start to see something. Because again, a red ferret or a ferret against a red background is just totally bizarre and will attract some people and turn a lot of people off. So we have to figure out a way, I think, to start easing into the designs. But you're right, man. There's a lot of, I see some of the stuff that these Japanese guys put out, man, guys and gals, and they're like some of the single most talented freelancers out there. I don't know why they're not getting more work. And I think it's just because there's not enough value created around the amazing things they can do. Not yet.
Do you think it's... Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Okay, I just wanted to say that's a good idea, as I understand. So, yeah, we can make a small changes, bold changes, but small changes. Not disrupt everything at once, but just a small step forward, but which will distinguish you from the other guys on the market. Yeah, I think I've got your advice. Thank you. It's really valuable.
No worries.
And I was going to ask, do you think how much of this like lack of success for all these freelancers that you think are so talented are attributable more to branding versus just the creative economy that I feel like Japan is on the leading edge of, just as much as it is in like California and the States, you know, like, because if we talked about the entire States, it's not the same as California.
I think there's a general underappreciation for freelance. It's actually, you know, just to give a little context really quickly on what Misthios Media is, which is the company there that how linked which is our team, we know the concept of the Ronin, which is like kind of like a masterless samurai, right? It's a warrior without a lord to serve. And the freelancer was the same thing. It was a knight or medieval warrior that didn't have a lord to serve, right? We've kind of, I guess, numbed the world to the term freelancer. And people are like, oh, anybody and everybody can be a freelancer. And there's no weight behind the word anymore, right? So the Misthios is the Greek word for freelancer. It was a sellsword that would travel from village to village and take on tasks that nobody wanted to do, or took on tasks that would be too difficult for like an army to do, but they were very elite at what they did. And the Misthios was the kind of person that you would hire to go put a hit on somebody if you needed to. It was also the same person to collect money or to go out and slay a beast. And they were respected. They were respected in Greek culture. It wasn't something to frown upon. It wasn't like a highwayman or some like hired merc. There was some status to it. So the idea behind Mistias Media was I was noticing so many talented freelancers in my sphere out here in Hawaii and abroad and across the world that were really great at what they did, but they didn't necessarily excel at the business part or the lead generation part or the sales part. And I realized that I had strengths in selling and communicating with brands. And so I provided a roof for these Misthios to operate under. And we tackle projects, large scale projects that would take a team of 20 in-house for a corporation with maybe like 5 to 7 of us. And because we don't have to follow the protocol of corporate, we don't have to go work our way up a hierarchy of emails every 2 seconds. Oh, we got to send it to this guy and then he's got to get it approved by this guy. No, the only person we're in contact with is our point of contact in the company, and then we do our thing. And they pay us much less money than corporate would have to spend if they did it in-house to complete a project that would take them 6 months to a year in 3 months, our time, right? You can look at it like a black ops team or a team of elites. So to answer your question, I think that there's a great underappreciation for the freelancer, not just in Japan, but like globally across the world. Extremely talented guys, like I think Bodan said, is really talented designers out there just like not being able to feed themselves. And I think what it's going to require is very much what Angel is already doing, creating collectives of like-minded guys and gals like us that very talented and very gifted at what we do, coming together and meshing our minds. And what I like to describe Misthios as is that we're all superheroes with our own unique powers, powerful flying solo, but when we form together, we're the fucking Avengers, right? So it's this idea that don't devalue yourself. You know, you've got your own superpowers. But again, when you work with a team, you can take on Thanos with the Infinity Gauntlet. That's pretty badass.
Awesome, Danny. So guys, we are almost at the end of the show, and we're going to allow one more question, which is from Michael. Michael, go ahead. You have the last question, man.
Hey, I was very interested in hearing more about your background story. The one that you said depressed that group of Japanese people.
Oh, yeah, sure, man. I won't get into the super dark stuff. The too long didn't read version is experienced a traumatic life event in 2010, lost somebody very close to me. And then I turned to the wrong sources. I, confided in drugs and and alcohol, and I became disconnected with my family, even though they were very, very supportive. I can look back in hindsight and realize that I was very much loved and supported, and that the demons that I had created, or the stories that I was telling myself, right? Because that's all we do is tell ourselves stories. The whole world is all about stories, man. This storytelling goes far beyond just marketing. But my stories of self-belief were not very good. And I ended up in the gutter. And there were a few really amazing people that kind of I met just by chance along the way, that just were passing by, and kind of set me on a path or the trajectory of recovery and getting off of that. And I had to start developing a story for myself that was completely like a night and day difference from the story that I was battling. And you know how there's that saying, fake it till you make it. I wouldn't really encourage that verbatim. But what I will say is that you have to start telling yourself the story that of the hero that you do want to be. And I wanted to be healthy. I didn't want to be morbidly obese. I was huge. And I was sick, and I was addicted to substances. And I had to create a story of being a vibrant, healthy guy that was off the streets. And I created maybe illusions of grandeur. At some point, I was like, I'm going to be a multimillionaire and I'm going to help people. You know, I had to take the whole philanthropist approach. But I'm telling you, man, if those were delusions, I'm so glad I had them, because it was a story that I could attach myself to and make small progress on every day. I truly believe that baby steps are the way to do it. I don't think quitting anything overnight. It took me 5 years to put on that weight. It's going to take me at least 2.5 years to get it off. And I think a lot of us are impatient, and we want instant gratification. And we've been conditioned for that, because that's what Western brands and consumer ads have done. They give us things immediately. I just think that the world can be healed through storytelling. I really do. And start being kinder to yourself, and you start telling yourself stories that empower you, stories that inspire you. I mean, I'm living proof. I'm here. I'm not dead in a ditch somewhere, and it's been 10 years. And I love what I do, and I'm grateful to be here. So I want to be able to help Japan with that, because I see it as the world in general, but I see Japan as kind of like the perfect opportunity to really experiment with a combination of empathy and storytelling, because they need it really badly.
All right, Danny. That was perfect. Thank you so much. And if you could tell us a little bit about the song you picked.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I wouldn't say it's my favorite song of all time, but it does get me pumped. It's The Fighter by Gym Class Heroes. And a little cheesy to some. I would be throwing down some like Eminem or something if I really wanted to get into it. But The Fighter is a song about the underdog. It's, again, the everyday Joe, right? It's everybody, I think, at some point in their life has felt like everything's against them and there's no way out. And yeah, I think that we need to develop more self-love. And when we do that, when we love ourselves more, we can love other people more efficiently. There's a reason they tell you to put your oxygen mask on first before you help the other person. And so many of us, man, we're not doing that. So The Fighter is kind of like an anthem for the underdog, and telling all the kids out there, the young people, that I know it seems like shit is real right now, but you're strong enough to do hard things.
All right. I think that's going to be the perfect way to end today's session. Danny, we know it's late in Hawaii, so we're all super grateful that you could join and share your story. Thank you so much, man. And to William, Herb, Michael, Bodan, the guys, thank you so much for asking awesome questions. You guys are the spark that light the fire in Nightcrawlers. So, without you guys, we're nothing. So I want to say thank you so much for asking those amazing questions.
Angel, one question. Do we want to ask for a quote, which we are asking usually? What do you want to change in the world? I think, or something like that.
Ooh, all right.
What do I want to change in the world?
So we usually, I didn't ask it because I thought, you know, what Danny said would be the perfect ending for the show. Danny, usually I ask
Oh,
people,
sorry then.
it's all good, no worries. I usually ask people, what is the change that they would like to see in the world? As a last question, would you like to answer that?
You know, man, it sounds cheesy and cliche. I just want to see people be nicer to each other, man. There's a lot of stupid stuff going on that makes no sense. Like, you know, people treating each other differently because of who they love or what color their skin is. And you would think after thousands and thousands of years of being on this planet, we would have gotten our shit together already. But we've got work to do. And I just want to see more empathy, you know, take a second to just take a deep breath and kind of separate yourself from your own experience. Try to feel what the other person is doing. And I think that, or what they're going through. And I think that, again, we have all the tools necessary in our toolbox. So